Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, migrant leaders, mentees, and students, and welcome our friends and sponsors at Anglo American. Today is the first of this particular collaboration with our corporate sponsor, Anglo American, and I'd like to particularly thank our leadership sponsors, Selena Sharif and Diego Henriquez, who are in this conference today. Selima will be talking about how to write a compelling CV, and we have also co-presenters who will be talking about the topic and also talking about their exceptional careers. You will later have the opportunity to join them in breakout rooms and ask them any questions you'd like. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the stage to Selena Sharif. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen, and thank you to all the people behind the scenes in Migrant Leaders. We're very happy to run the session today. Firstly, Ellen, can you just confirm you can see my presentation? Perfect. Lovely, excellent. So good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Selena Sharif, and as Ellen said, I'm one of the leaders at Anglo American. I'm actually a HR leader. And when I was preparing for this session, I was thinking about the number of hours, days, weeks, and maybe even years I have spent reviewing CVs, if not for recruiting people or certainly within the organization. So I'd like to think I've got some level of expertise when it comes to looking at CVs. So today's session is very much, I would call it a mini masterclass. It's an opportunity for us to share with you the tools and the techniques and the tips on how to make and create a really compelling CV, the one that is reflective of you, your background, your skills, and your experiences. And as Ella mentioned, I'm going to have a co-presenter today. So Nancy, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Nancy. I'm an intern working at the management consulting firm in London known as North Highland. We have been contracted by Anglo American to work with them to implement solutions into their business. And one of the pieces of work that I've been doing is helping them with this workshop. So I'm here starting my career to give you a bit more advice from an early perspective and the experience that I've had with CVs and applying to jobs.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Nancy. We thought it'd be quite a nice contrast to have both of us talking you through today in terms of CV. As Ellen said, at the end of the session, I've got two other colleagues who will be joining me as well to talk about their careers to date, and I'll introduce them at the end. So let's move on. So what are we going to cover with you today? Firstly, I hope it's going to be a really practical session. Lots of hints and lots of tips that we're going to be doing and sharing with you some do's and don'ts. If you do lots of research out there, you'll see there's lots of advice around writing CVs. And trust me, a lot of them are really, really good. As I said, it's really meant to be a really small masterclass that we're giving you today. And for those of you who are really canny, you'll see in the top right corner, we're also going to be using Mentee. So if you haven't done so already, I suggest you take a snapshot of that Mentee or go onto mentee.com and just put in that code there of 15 23 94 21. Nancy, I might ask you just to put that code into the chat so people can see it. Because as we go through, there are a couple of questions that we would like to ask you. You know, we're trying to make this session as interactive as possible. Otherwise, quite frankly, listening to my voice for 30 minutes is going to be really boring for you. So we wanted to get your thoughts and ideas on a couple of items. What I would say also up front, there'll be some things you'll be like, yep, I know all of this. My view is great, fantastic. This is a way as a reminder. And there may be one or two things that you think, oh, I didn't know that, or let me research a little bit more. So when it comes for you to either update your CV, if not even to write your CV, you've got a firm foundation in terms of what you need to include and how you need to represent yourself. So it may sound like a really obvious question, but really, you know, a CV is your marketing tool. And it really needs to reflect upon, as I've said before, your skills, your background, and your career history. It is a way of introducing yourself to a potential employer. And let me share with you a couple of items that you may not be aware of. Recruiters and hiring managers get many, many, many CVs. And in reality, they may only have up to 15 seconds to review a CV. So all the hard work that you might have done may go for nothing if you cannot capture very, very quickly the essence of you and why you are the best candidate for the role. So in 15 seconds is a really, really short period of time. We also need to remember that a CV, you may start off it being quite generic, but you must need to adapt that to the role that you're applying to. And you'll hear that a couple of times in my presentation going forward. I will touch upon that later. And ultimately, a CV is a mechanism by which you are trying to get to the next stage of a recruitment process. So that's why we say it is a marketing tool that gets you from the, yeah, maybe I'll invite you to an interview, to, yes, I want to invite you to an interview. And it really needs to be one of those items, as I said before, it's not meant to be a full biography, it's meant to be a snapshot of you. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Nancy with our first mentee question.
Great.
I'll stop sharing.
Perfect. If you would all like to go over to mentee.com and type in that code that's in the chat, it should take you to a welcome screen. I'll share my screen now so that you can all see the presentation, and we should be able to see how many people are coming in. So once you're in, if you could all let me know just by putting a thumbs up in the chat or something similar, that would be great.
And I would say, please don't be shy. Otherwise, the next 25 minutes is going to be really boring with just me. I'm sure Nancy, to be honest, will be more compelling than I will be. But it's a really good way of interacting with us in terms of some of the fun questions we'll be asking you.
Great. So I'll give you all a minute or so because Mentee can play up sometimes, and then we'll get going. The important thing about this is being honest with where you feel you are in your CV application process and your experience, just so that we can tailor our response to your experience and make sure that everything's as relevant as it needs to be. Great, so I'll get going. If you're not in yet, it should bring you straight to the page that we're on without any issues. Great, so the first question is, what does your CV currently look like? Obviously, we don't know what level of expertise you have when it comes to CVs. So if you wouldn't mind sliding along rating from 1 to 10 of I don't have an up-to-date CV to I have an up-to-date CV, that would be fantastic. And then the same with a LinkedIn profile. For those of you who aren't aware of what LinkedIn is, it's almost like an online CV and it's heavily used by recruiters. So it's arguably as important as a CV, just to make sure that there's some consistency in your application and that hiring managers know what they're looking for and how you match that profile. And as you can see, there's an average appearing on my screen. So in a sec, we can talk through the general level of the group and what we could do with that information.
And Nancy, if I just add to what you've said,
sure.
A lot of organizations will allow you to actually pass, i.e. copy your LinkedIn profile into their applicant tracking system. So I always suggest you have an up-to-date CV, which is on Word, will have detailed on what you want, but also think about how you want to reflect that with your LinkedIn profile. A lot of applicant tracking systems, otherwise known as ATSs, have a way which you can apply for roles through LinkedIn. And if your LinkedIn profile is really great and up to date, with a little bit of tweaking, you can use that to apply for roles. So that's why we're asking about the CV and the LinkedIn profile. But today's session is just about CVs. Trust me, we could spend a whole other program, masterclass on LinkedIn profiles, and maybe we can do that another day.
So it looks like on average, everyone has at least attempted a CV or a LinkedIn profile before. Our average 5.8 shows that there is some confidence, but there's a lot of areas for us to build. Throughout this Mentee in this presentation, there'll be lots of areas for us to touch on to hopefully build your knowledge in these areas. If you have any questions, either type them in the chat or, and then we'll answer them at the end in the Q&A session in the breakout room. So Selena, I'll pass back to you.
If you unshare for a second, that'd be great. Great. So Nancy, I think you're going to talk us through the characteristics of a good CV.
Sure. So one of the most important things, as Selena's mentioned, is that a CV is not only about expressing who you are, but expressing that in a really short space of time. As Selena's mentioned, 15 seconds is the average amount of time that a recruiter will use to scan your CV. And although that can seem really intimidating and about grabbing attention in a really impossible timescale, if you stick to simple ideas, it's much more likely to fit into the criteria of that the hiring recruiter is looking for. So the 6 key items are making sure that your CV is easy to read and understand. It's all well and good having big words in your CV and expressing yourself as someone who is good with writing and things like that. But if your words aren't making sense, then the recruiter will just sort of ignore what you've got to say because they haven't got time to decode how you're trying to present yourself. Visually powerful is another important thing, but this doesn't necessarily mean arty and looking really striking. It more means something that can represent yourself in a really concise form and a simple form, so that the recruiter reading it through isn't overwhelmed by all this information and can get a really succinct message of who you are as a person and whether you're a good fit for a company. Following on from this, skills and capabilities are obviously important. Try to match your CV to the skills required in the job application, or at least to the area that you're interested in, because this means that the boxes will be ticked quickly and someone scanning through can go, oh yeah, they match the criteria, that's great, I'll put them in the pile for an interview. And then again, clearly define your job related experiences. This doesn't necessarily have to be industry related, it more needs to be skills related, especially as a younger person. It can be hard to break into an industry without experience. So I'd recommend focusing on things that you've done in the past that have similar skills and that can demonstrate you'll be able to handle the job, and make sure you try and summarize that in quite a simple manner so that the recruiter can get the idea of your capabilities really quite quickly. 2 to 4 pages long can seem like an intimidating number, especially when you're younger and you don't have enough experience. I've been told that as you get older, it can actually be quite limiting. So just try to make sure that you get all the information that you have about you on the page. And once we talk through what a CV includes, 2 pages will seem really quite achievable. And also make sure that you negate any information that isn't relevant to the job. It can be really tempting to put something in that you're proud of or that you think really represents you as a person, but if it's not relevant to the job, the employer may not see it as an asset in their 15 seconds of scanning and focus on proving why you're relevant to that job specifically, rather than why you're just a great person. Selena, next slide.
Thank you, Nancy. So there's a couple of things before we really get to the nitty-gritty. So remember, a CV is an opportunity to promote yourself. It's about the relevant skills, the experience that you have in a field, the appropriate capabilities, and the job requirements. And I think when you're much earlier in your career, those can seem quite daunting items. But as we go through, we'll give you some ideas and hints and tips of what you could be putting into play. Because as much as it is aligning your experience and your background to the role requirements, it's also around making sure that what you have done, you are able to relate it across. So we'll talk a little bit about paid work, unpaid work, volunteering work. All of those items can be really, really valuable assets when it comes to beefing up your experience going into play. And I wanted to talk a little bit around sort of the use of artificial intelligence. And when Nancy and I were putting the slide back together, Nancy definitely quizzed me about this particular item. So let me tell you about this. So most organizations and most recruiters are starting to use their technology, an applicant tracking system of some sort that has some level of artificial intelligence. And I say some level because some levels of artificial intelligence are actually much more agile than others. Others are quite rudimentary. And majority of the way in which the AI works is it'll look at the job advert or the role profile and look at the words used, the connection between between those words, and it'll also look at actually what's in your CV as well. As I said, some of the AI can be really quite crude and it might sometimes be a word-to-word match. Some of it is a little bit much more sophisticated. So there are many different rules and algorithms that come into these items. So that's why it is really, really important when you are writing your role profile. Yes, have a generic one, is always to have the job advert or the online ad, whatever it is, to hand, so you can have a look at how do you adapt your CV to the requirements. And I use the word adapt. I'm not saying you lie. It is around making sure whatever you're putting down on your CV is still accurate and properly representative. But by really being aware of what's in that advert will ensure if there are organizations out there using AI, you're more likely to be higher up in that sort of screening percentage fit than somebody who hasn't done that piece of work. But I would also like to think organizations don't fully rely upon AI. There will be a human being also looking at it. So some organizations may use the AI to do a first review. And depending on the ranking of the AI, they may then do a recruiter, a human being, or a manager will then start looking at the CV to just have a look at what actually are the requirements as we would be expecting. So these are some of the core items in terms of preparing to write your CV. And we've got another mentee that we would also like to, we'd like to sort of share with you. So Nancy, I'm going to hand over back to you.
Sure. So I've seen that some of you have been extra keen and put some answers in, but for those of you who haven't, this is just a quick question of what do you think you should include in your CV?
And for those of you who have already got in, fantastic. I like your enthusiasm. I like that proactivity, which is great.
So from the current submissions, it definitely seems like you're hitting the spot. Job experience, skills and education, very important, as are relevant interests where they make you look more impressive. A summary and a short profile are very key to a CV and something we'll talk about later because they can go either way. And again, relevant work experience can be particularly important for younger people who haven't had the exposure that older people have managed to get. And I find that that's the best way to show yourself as someone with relevant interest and experience in the industry that you're applying to. Grades also true, and educational background, yes. Selena, I'll pass back to you so that you can talk it through.
Thank you very much. So guys, look like you guys are absolutely on the ball when it comes to some of the items to include. So some of these items I'm going to talk to you about are absolutely exactly what you've said. Some of them may be a little bit of a surprise and I'll explain what it is. Absolutely, your name and your contact details are really important and I'll explain later on why that is. We'll talk to you a little bit about a professional statement. That's becoming something more and more that we are seeing, certainly in experience, but also I would say early talent CVs. And that's normally a couple of lines at the top of the CV that talk about what makes you unique. So when I talked about that 15 seconds people have a look at, I too will probably just have a scan through of that to go, oh, but that's interesting. Let me look at it below. You're absolutely right about the work experience, qualification, any skills, any technical skills. And look, a CV could include where relevant achievements, hobbies, interest, etc. It could also be a link to a social media profile, but I would say only if it's appropriate and only if it's up to date. So let me talk to you about what, in my opinion, you shouldn't necessarily be including in a CV. So a photo, unless you're going for a modeling job, photo is just not required. There are some organizations do ask for it for a specific reason, but you don't need your photo on there. I see quite a lot of CVs that have really fancy graphics and imagery. To be honest, with the technology, the way it works, you may actually lose that. And actually, whilst you may think it's really funky for you, when you're looking at a lot of CVs, it does actually detract from what you're wanting to actually say. So steer away from any colored or fancy fonts. Next one you may have a good giggle over is around unprofessional email addresses. Trust me, I've seen a lot. Email addresses should really be quite simple, really obvious, but keep it simple. I've seen some people actually put copies of their certificates on the back of their CV. Do you know something? We don't need that. If you want copies of your certificates, your A-levels or GCSEs or your degrees, we'll ask for it. You don't need to put a salary down. Don't need to put date of birth or age. Marital status, you don't need to put down. Religion, you don't need to. Medical history or political affiliation. You don't need to include any of those items. And the reason why I do actually bring it up is I do see more and more people sometimes adding some of these items. And I think they're saying, actually, you don't need to include them. You don't need to include them at all. So just a couple of reminders around some of these items, what to include, which is what you got, and a little bit of reminders of actually, you don't need to include it, okay? Nancy, I think I'm handing back over to you.
Yep, so we'll move further on to the mentee. This question revolves around personal statements, not as in uni applications, but as in a little summary at the top of your CV to summarize about you and kind of grab the attention of the recruiter. So I've come up with 3 statements here, and if you can scan each statement as though you're a recruiter, and then on the next slide we'll have a voting system to vote for which one you think is most suitable for a job application, bearing in mind what we talked about and bearing in mind that you want to come across as a professional individual and someone who's really keen on the job and has relevant experience. So I'll give you a minute or so to do that, and then there's a voting system on the next slide.
Nancy, the one I have a good giggle over is make lots of money. That's a cracking example, Nancy, you've put in there.
Well, it's what lots of people are thinking, isn't it? Okay, we're a bit pushed for time, so I'll move on. We will be sending you these slide decks anyway, so any information that we gloss over for the rest of the presentation, don't worry about, you will still be able to get a hold of. So if you wouldn't mind voting for which one you felt was the best one, and I'll talk you quickly through which answer is probably correct and why that is. Fantastic. If you want to keep on voting, I will just go back to the presentation so we can talk through the answers. So yeah, statement 1, as Selena highlighted, perhaps not particularly accurate given its very brutally honest reasoning of why someone's applying for the job. Although a lot of people might be thinking it's not necessarily what you should admit to your employer, because you want to come across as educated and genuinely willing to help the business develop, and that's where your focus lies. Question number 2, sorry, was the best one we've decided. It's concise, to the point, summarizes the individual's abilities and summarizes how they match the job. It's slightly better than number 3, which was hard because I deliberately tried to make it difficult, because it's more concise and more to the point, and from a recruiter's point of view seems a little more focused, which is what you should be thinking about. What does the job ask for, and how can you represent that in your experience? The personal statement at the top is really, really small, a couple of lines, so you really need to summarize what you want to get across as briefly as you can, and that is a challenge in itself. But number 2 is probably the best example of what a recruiter would want to see at the top of a CV.
Thank you for that, Nancy. And I think the piece around the that professional statement is almost like an elevator pitch. You know, if you were ever stuck in an elevator with somebody for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, what do you want them to know about you? So that professional statement is becoming more and more in that particular category. And there's lots of resources out there that can help you refine some of those items. It's quite an iterative process. You come up with lots of items, you then zone it down, but it's something that can be very much reflected upon you. At times, it's probably the last thing that you write actually in your CV, even though it goes at the front. You do everything else, and then you go back to say, hey, if somebody's going to review my CV, this is almost like the trailer for my CV. So let's talk a little bit around the work history. So this is the part of the section of your CV where you prove that why your experience, and it can be professional experience when you get more experience, but also, as I said, it can be unpaid work as well as paid work, as well as voluntary work, makes you the right candidate for the role. And you'll see I use the word right candidate, not the best candidate. They're the ones who will decide if you're the best candidate. This is about the right candidate. Think about using powerful verbs to start the sentence. You improved, you negotiated, you reduced. And you must be thinking, well, you know, that's quite difficult for me to market myself when I was only doing maybe a Saturday job, or I was tutoring, or I was looking after my siblings, or whatever it can be. Trust me, if you work at it, you can actually put together quite a powerful verb that you can start that sentence. You would normally start off with doing it chronologically. So you start with the most recent and work backwards. You start up with the job title or what it was, the organizational name, and how long you worked. Not necessarily down to the exact date, but normally the month and the year. And what I would suggest that you would do is trying to aim for no more than 6 bullet points, which really do articulate the key responsibilities, achievement, skills, and capabilities you gained. And don't underestimate around the responsibilities. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are doing items, whether it's at school, at university, in your personal life, volunteering, paid and unpaid, that actually have a level of responsibility that any employer would look at and go, gosh, this is actually quite interesting. So remember, it is around articulating that work experience on that page. And finally, remember, if there are any gaps in your employment for whatever variety of reasons, if you get to the next stage, they will probably ask you in terms of that. So be ready with a sensible answer around that, maybe a gap in work history. And so moving on to education and training, as we've said, as some of you pointed out in the Mentee, yes, we put down our education, whether it's tertiary background, i.e. university, whether it's secondary item there as well. And yes, my suggestion is always to start off with listing your qualifications from the most recent to the oldest, and make sure that they are relevant as well. I jokingly say to people, guys, if you've got a GCSE in basket weaving, unless you're going to go for something basket weaving, you may not want to include it. But hey, if you feel that makes you sound like an interesting person, include it. I think it becomes much, much more relevant as you become actually more skills and experience and more educational history that you have. You realize some of the early qualifications actually may not be relevant. So that's why you just have a look at those items. And once again, you start off with the name of the education institution, the dates that you were there, what you studied, whether it was a diploma, degree, apprenticeship, certifications, whatever it is. If you are currently in study, it's worth putting down that you are currently in study and the expected graduation date that you'll be doing. And also it is worth adding other courses that are relevant to a role that might be interesting. So this could have been, I don't know, a course you've done on, I don't know, computer programming, or another language you've picked up, or it could be something on, you know, social skills or influencing skills or marketing, something that you may not formally have a qualification, but something that you are actually working towards. And the final piece I'll say is make sure you can back up any courses or qualifications on your CV with the required documentation at the latter stages, because lots of organizations do check to make sure that actually you do have those skills and those educational backgrounds that you've said up front, especially around the formal qualifications. You may also see roles that talk about key skills. I know this role requires X, Y, and Z skill. You know, there's two ways of tackling that. Some people like including a section on these are the skills that I have. There's nothing wrong with that. But my suggested way would be to include those skills into how you are describing the work history section of it, or maybe even your educational or training section of it. So if they are asking for people who are, you know, collaborative, team building, influencing, marketing, those would be the sort of words you should be putting into that career history aspects of your main CV. And once again, my word of warning is please make sure you're adequately trained and you are capable of performing the skills. A good example of that is, you know, if you say, I'll make it up, you're fluent in Mandarin. If you put that on your CV, please expect that somebody will probably ask you about that. And please do make sure that you are fluent in Mandarin, because if you haven't been truthful, it starts reflecting upon what other aspects of your CV you may not have been truthful with. And with that, Nancy, I'm going to hand back over to you about skills.
Yes, so if we go to, this is the last Mentee question. Can you give some examples of what sort of skills employers might be looking for? Now, I think it's important here to differentiate between soft skills and hard skills. So a lot of the ones we're seeing on the screen now are soft skills, and that's fantastic. But there's also hard skills that might be required by an employer, and these will include things more like being fluent in Mandarin or having, for example, PowerPoint skills, Excel skills, and things like that. So I think it's important to remember that although soft skills are fantastic and you want to be able to prove them and demonstrate them, a CV will also be searching for hard skills. So don't get too bogged down in the soft skills, because I feel like they are promoted a lot about using your ability, which is great. But if you do have skills, for example, like Python or something similar that you think is relevant to the job, make sure you include them, because they can be a real asset to a company, because it means they don't have to train you in anything like that. And can really push you forward in the order of the application. Fantastic. So we're tight on time, so Selena, I'll pass back to you.
And Nancy, that's a really good point around making sure there's a combination of the hard skills and the soft skills that are required, and also just really thinking carefully around, well, actually what makes you unique. Somebody right at the start talked about unique selling points. This could be something where you can actually bring your unique selling points to the front and sort of really very much weaving that there. Okay, so handing over to me. So another area that you may see around your CV is around professional memberships. So these can be groups that you are associated with. It could be a group, an organization, something you do at school. It could be a professional external membership. It could be something that you're doing at university. This is a really great way of showing your interest outside of what you've been doing, maybe within a sector. So for example, if you're doing a STEM subjects, your science and engineering, etc., if you are part of an association or membership, it's a good aspect. That would be a great one to include here. And normally I would suggest you put this right underneath your educational and your training experts. So once again, you would list your affiliates, the type of membership if it's relevant, and the date that you joined. So this could be associations, chartered membership. It could be anything that is absolutely linked either to you, but more importantly to your role. And sometimes you might see employers say, no, you must have associate chartered status for this or that status for that. And if it mentions that, I would definitely include your professional memberships there. But please remember to make those memberships relevant and professional, and avoid, I would say, controversial memberships on your CV. And you can see some examples there. No need to put political groups unless you are going for a role that is, I don't know, political lobbying, for example. Steer away from controversial topics, as well as any kind of social groups with a bad image out there. Once again, it is around linking in to show another dimension for you, but also to bump up your capability and your interest in a particular area. And there'll be a number of items, and I'm sure that you're doing will fit into that category. So, and if I just move on, another area that people talk about is around hobbies and interests and references. So my advice would be include any hobbies and interests in your CV. It's not a necessity, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And I think when you're early in your career, it is actually quite useful to put in useful, relevant hobbies, especially when it gives the recruiter or the manager a different dimension to you. And, you know, as I said there, if you're low in work experience, it just gives you that kind of additional edge. So this could be, I don't know, if you're interested in astronomy, or you're doing work in terms of, you know, volunteering. Volunteering can be paid, unpaid in the work history. It could be down in hobbies. If you're at school and universities, you may be part of societies. There may be a hobby there. Those are the sort of things that you can actually include in these particular areas. But once again, take a step back to think, is this really relevant? And is it going to add to my CV? And the final piece I'll just mention on this one is around references. You know, I see lots of CVs that talk about, you know, please see my referees below, or references available on request. My view is on this one, you know, you don't need to include that. If an employer wants to get references, they'll ask you for that. They'll ask you further down in the recruitment process. Yes, there are some organizations that do ask you for references up front, but normally they will hardwire that into the application process. So don't waste time to say, you know, my referees are below, or, you know, references available on request. It's one of those items that absolutely is already sort of there, and to actually, and it's almost there by subconscious. If they want your referees, they'll ask for it. And actually, it's probably the right thing that if you do give people who are referees to an employer, just give the referees the heads up and a courtesy around, I'm going to make you a referee. Are you okay to be my referee? And one of the other items before I hand over to Nancy, and you might be wondering, why is Selena labeling my name and my contact details? So yes, we live in an electronic world and applications coming electronically, but you'll be surprised to hear a lot of recruiters and managers do still print out CVs. And when you're printing out a stack of CVs, sometimes people, will file them away. Sometimes they drop them on the floor. My advice has always been, every page of your CV, right at the bottom in the footnote, should just say your name and maybe your email address. So if your CV does get mixed up with somebody else's, they can clearly see, oh, that CV is Saleema's. It's just one of those really nice housekeeping items. And trust me, it's happened to me. I print a whole load of CVs up because I want to review them over a coffee or whatever. I go to the printer and guess what? I'm doing too much. CVs fall on the floor and it's a bit of a mess. So it's just one of those housekeeping items. It just makes sure every single step page has your name and your contact details. So Nancy, over to you. We're almost there.
Great. So we've got a couple of slides summarising what you should do on your CV, in contrast to everything we've talked about that you shouldn't do. We've got some kind of 15 or so points that summarise what you should do. We will send you these slides, so I won't talk through all of them, but I think a few are really important to point out. One of them is avoiding acronyms or abbreviations or internal terminology. It can be really easy to include something you think that is obvious, but something as simple as using the wrong acronym or something that doesn't quite read to the recruiter can put you back, especially when they don't have the time to sort of sit there and try and decode what you're trying to say. And really importantly, proofreading your CV can make all the difference. A lot of recruiters can be really picky about things like grammar, spelling, or even formatting. So just spending time looking over what you've written. And what I like to do is write it, leave it alone, and come back to it a couple of days later with a fresh mind. And then you can read it through completely fresh. And quite often I find that something is wrong there, and just doing that extra step in the process can really make sure you eradicate any problems that might put recruiters off. Could you go to the next slide, please, Selena? Fab. So some other key points on here. Font size seems something that's really basic, but keeping it to a readable font and font size is really important. Something really big or really small will not only make your CV stand out, and not in a good way, but it'll also make it more difficult to read. So just keeping it simple and so that it blends in with everything else is really important. And also make sure that you label each section, because as we've said, most areas and most employers don't always read themselves, and the applicant tracking systems can be quite confusing. So you want to use them to your favour rather than putting a lot of things on the paper and just hoping that it all works out. So label your fields, and that should put you in a good position.
Thank you for that, Nancy. As we said, we're going to send the slides out. There's a whole load of other hints and tips out there. So my final tips are: keep it simple, spend time doing your CV. To this day, I actually will update my CV a minimum of twice a year. My colleagues think I'm slightly crazy, but actually having good housekeeping around your CV just makes it really, really easy. When there is a job, you take it, you can adapt it. Remember, you are competing with many other candidates, and you need to frame the CV to the role. So think about it being very crisp and concise and straight to the point. As I've said before, update your CV regularly. You know, if there is a major milestone that you do, you secure your next qualifications, whatever that milestone be, go back to your CV and save it again. And as I said before, you know, you may be thinking, why she's talking about this? The number of CVs that I see where the content details haven't been up to date. It's hate for you to apply for a role and your contact details were wrong there. So check your mobile number and check your email address and make sure it's always up to date. So with that, that's been some of the mini masterclass that we wanted to run through with you today. So we hope we found that really useful. And then, Elan, we can go on to the next stage of the session.
Thank you very much, Selena and Nancy. Thank you, everyone. So we are next going to have Selena, Estella, and Francisco, who will each spend 3 or 4 minutes describing their career story, which we thought you will find both interesting and insightful. And then we are going to have 3 breakout rooms, one for each of them, and you get to choose which breakout room you go to and have a 5-minute chat with each of the speakers. So I shall pass back to Selena, if that's all right.
Absolutely. So I get to go first, okay, before I hand over. So Francesco, I'm going to go to you next, and Estella, I'll go to you afterwards. So just giving my wonderful colleagues a bit of a warning. So look, my name is Selena Sharif. My official job title, which won't make sense to most people, it barely makes sense to me, is Head of HR for Service Delivery. All you need to know is I'm a HR leader. I was brought up in inner city Birmingham. I'm born and bred in Birmingham. I was educated in Birmingham, and I'm now a mother of 2 teenagers, 15 and 17. And some of us were saying beforehand, my teenagers are going through those dreaded mocks elements. So having been through the mocks myself as a mother, looking at my children doing their mocks, trust me, it is much scarier being a parent. A little bit about me. I'm actually a scientist. I studied chemistry at university, and I really purely by accident fell into HR. And I would say there are so many things in my career that I fell accidentally into a role, into an opportunity. Some people might say I was in the right place at the right time, or maybe the wrong place at the wrong time. Some people might say I was very open-minded about the opportunities, but I've certainly had a very squiggly career. If you had said to me all those years ago, Selena, you would be doing the role that you're doing today, I would have sort of laughed at them going, I don't even know what this role actually is, let alone I don't even think this role even existed all those many years ago. So, you know, careers are always changing and very much always evolving. But regardless of the role I've been doing, I've always been really lucky enough to work with great leaders. So working with somebody that you trust and respect is really important. I've worked in many countries, I lived in many countries, I've traveled to many countries. Well, clearly I haven't been doing that over the last 2 years, but I've been really lucky enough to, you know, work with many diverse colleagues around the world. And I've been really lucky working with people who are actually kind and nice and actually quite inspirational in their own way. So the one piece of advice I would give all of you as you are embarking upon your careers is always to be quite open-minded. You may have a really clear view where you want to go, but you know something, life has a way of ebbing and flowing you into most interesting particular areas. Always be open-minded, because there are many different ways in which you can get to where you want to. And you actually may end up going somewhere even better. You just didn't realize it at the time. So that's my piece of advice, is to always remain open-minded. So with that, I'm going to hand over to my wonderful colleague, Francesco.
Thanks, Selena. Hi, everyone. I'm Francesca De La Rotonda. My job title is Continuous Improvement Principal. In a nutshell, what I do, try to help organizations to work in a more efficient and effective way. So on one hand, I look at processes and how we can be more efficient, how people can understand better the process and feel that the process is flawless. And on the other hand, which is the part I like the most, is coaching people into problem solving and process improvement. My background in a nutshell, so I was born and raised in Italy. You might have guessed based on my accent. And I studied law, actually. So as Selena, something completely different. Master's in law. As soon as I graduated, I decided to do something completely different for the joy of my parents. They're like, what are you doing? Why? And so I started as a project manager in the cooperation and development sector. So something completely different. While I was doing that, I realized I needed more education. And therefore I did another master's, an MBA in business administration, because I wanted to learn more about business, not just law. And then I moved into the corporate world. And one of my tips would be, as Selena also said, it's like plan for like 60, 70, 80% of what you want to do, and leave 20% to fate, and things will happen. And that's what happened to me, because I moved into different roles, different countries, to name a few. I worked in India, Malaysia, Hungary, and then the UK, obviously. So and it's almost everything has been, I won't say by chance, but almost everything was by chance. What is important, you just have your end goal and your vision of what you want to do. So what's your passion? What do you like? And another tip would be just try to learn at least one thing every day, because the moment you stop learning, then you ask yourself questions, and then you can move around and see other opportunities. So even if you don't end up in the perfect job to start with, just try to get the best out of it, learn, and then tailor those skills to what you want to do and where you want to get. That's all about me, I guess. So I'm going to hand over to my wonderful colleague, Estella.
Hi, everyone. My name is Estella Tracy. Hi. I'm an employee experience specialist. I have a really cool title, and my amazing role is to ensure that whatever we do, we have our employees at the center of everything. So I'm part of the HR services team. So if you think of what we do in HR, my role is to make sure that we do what's best for our employees, and it is what they need, and it's going to make their life and their work easier. A little bit of my background. I was born and raised in Brazil. I have not lived in Brazil for a really long time. I studied, so my undergrad is in psychology. I'm actually a trained psychologist in Brazil. I worked everywhere, so let me tell you a little bit about what I've done. Please, you will be able to guess how old I am. Do not play that game, not fun. But when I started working, it was around university. I started working in HR and recruitment and HR operations, a lot of fun. I decided to take a break and move to the US for a little bit. When I came back, I actually started working as an English teacher because I really enjoyed the English language. And after that, I actually I worked for the government as a teacher at the same time as I was working as an English teacher. But then, why not? I decided to go and work on a cruise ship. So I started working on a cruise ship as entertainment. So I did kids entertainment. I hosted some adult parties, but my focus was on kids entertainment. Then I started thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life? And I moved back to HR, but still on a cruise ship. So I was the assistant manager in the personal office. It was a lot of fun, a lot of work. But when I got to a point, and I was like, I was thinking to myself, if I continue here, because I was in the path for HRD, so I was being promoted to personal manager, and I thought, if I stay here, this is going to be my career. This is like, I'm always going to be stuck on a cruise ship. So I decided to stop, and I applied for my master's degree in organizational psychology. So while I was in the cruise ship, I was around the US. I did my master's in Portugal and Spain. So I did an Erasmus program. And then after that, I wound up in the UK. And I worked a little bit in recruitment. Then I moved to talent management. And now I'm in employee experience. So I'm living proof that you can actually have a lot of careers within your not that many years. Again, let's not talk about age, and you still find have fun in your career, and you can still find yourself. One tip that I would give you, and that's something that sometimes I actually have to remind myself, and I'm lucky to have Salima as my manager, because she reminds me that, but embrace what makes you different, because sometimes that's what's actually going to make you shine. So if, like, for me, for example, coming from a different country, warmer country where everybody's bubbly, that's what makes me different. And that's actually what helps me in my career, especially in employee experience, because I actually get people to share with me things that they wouldn't share with others. So that's my tip for you. Thank you. Back to you, Salima.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Salima, Francisco, and Estella. It was wonderful to hear your stories and your tips. So thank you so much once again, Diego Enriquez and Salima, as leadership sponsors from Anglo American, for your continuing support and collaboration with Migrant Leaders Charity. And thank you especially also to Francesco and Estella, as well as other colleagues who have joined and supported. Nancy, particularly, you had a key role here, and I loved the way you presented, and certainly learned from it. So thank you so much, everyone, for your amazing contributions. We have the next session with Anglo American, which we need to dial into in a minute or two. So without further ado, I'd like to thank our Migrant Leaders mentees as well for joining us, and our Migrant Leaders marketing intern, Adam Hart, who has been very helpful and joined us today as well for support. Thank you so much, and we'll speak to you soon.